In the summer of 1519, a young woman lay dying in the ducal palace of Ferrara. Whispers filled the corridors. Was it poison, the same weapon her family had wielded for decades? As Lucrezia Borgia drew her final breath, she took with her the secrets of Renaissance Italy's most notorious dynasty. But was she the calculating poisoner of legend, or the greatest victim of her family's ambition? We separate myth from reality in the life of the woman who became the face of Renaissance corruption, yet may have been its most misunderstood figure.
Welcome to the Saving History podcast, the sanctuary for castle devotees and medieval history enthusiasts. Prepare to embark on a thrilling voyage through time as we unveil enthralling history and legend. From ancient folklore to cutting-edge restoration, we've got it all covered. So grab your headphones and let's dive right in.
On April 18, 1480, in the eternal city of Rome, a child was born who would become synonymous with poison, murder, and political intrigue. Lucrezia Borgia entered the world as the illegitimate daughter of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, a man whose ambitions would reshape the papacy and whose family name would become a byword for Renaissance corruption. But to understand Lucrezia's story, we must first understand the world she was born into. This was not the Rome of ancient emperors or early Christian martyrs. This was Renaissance Rome, a city where spiritual authority and temporal power merged in ways that would have scandalized earlier ages. The papal court of the 15th century operated more like a secular monarchy than a religious institution, complete with armies, territorial ambitions, and dynastic marriages. Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia was perfectly suited to this environment. Born in Spain, he had come to Italy as a young man and rapidly climbed the ecclesiastical hierarchy through a combination of genuine ability, shameless nepotism, and strategic alliances. By the time Lucrezia was born, he was one of the most powerful men in Europe, vice-chancellor of the Catholic Church and a cardinal whose influence extended across kingdoms. The cardinal made no secret of his children. In an age when clerical celibacy was more honoured in theory than practice, Rodrigo openly acknowledged his offspring by several mistresses. Lucrezia was his daughter by Vanozza de Catane, a Roman courtesan who would bear him 4 children. Her brothers were Giovanni, Cesare, and the youngest, Geoffrey. Each would play crucial roles in the family's rise to power, but none would capture the popular imagination quite like Lucrezia. Picture the household where young Lucrezia grew up, a palace filled with artists, diplomats, scholars, and spies. This was the height of the Renaissance, when the rediscovery of classical learning merged with new artistic innovations and political theories. The Borgia Palace was a microcosm of this cultural flowering, where humanist scholars debated Aristotle while courtiers plotted the downfall of rival families. Lucrezia received an education extraordinary for a woman of her time. She learned Latin, Greek, and several modern languages. She studied poetry, music, and dance. Most importantly, she absorbed the political lessons that surrounded her daily. Lessons about power, alliance, and survival in a world where today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy with a shift of papal favour or the outcome of a single battle. The young girl would have witnessed the constant stream of visitors to her father's court, envoys from Venice bearing news of Ottoman movements in the east, French ambassadors discussing territorial claims in Naples, Spanish grandees reporting on New World discoveries. This was the world that shaped Lucrezia's understanding of politics, not as abstract theory, but as the daily business of survival and advancement. But even as she grew in this environment of power and privilege, dark clouds were gathering around the Borgia name. Whispers followed the family wherever they went. Stories of poisoned rivals, mysterious deaths, and unholy alliances spread through the courts of Europe. Some of these rumours were undoubtedly true. The Borgias were ruthless players in a ruthless game. Others were likely exaggerations or outright fabrications spread by their many enemies. For Lucrezia, these rumours would prove both a shield and a burden. The fear her family name inspired could protect her in dangerous situations, but it would also forever taint her reputation, making it impossible for contemporaries or later historians to see her clearly through the fog of legend and propaganda. When Lucrezia was 12 years old, her father achieved the ultimate prize in Renaissance politics. He was elected Pope Alexander VI. The election was controversial, marked by allegations of simony and corruption that would dog his entire pontificate. But for the Borgia family, it represented the culmination of decades of careful planning and relentless ambition. As the daughter of the Pope, Lucrezia suddenly found herself one of the most important unmarried women in Europe. Her hand in marriage became a diplomatic tool of immense value, capable of sealing alliances, ending wars, or opening new territories to papal influence. At the tender age of 12, she had become a pawn in a game whose stakes were nothing less than the control of Italy itself. The election of Rodrigo Borgia as Pope Alexander VI in August 1492 transformed not just his own fortunes, but the destiny of his entire family. For 13-year-old Lucrezia, it meant stepping from the shadows of Roman nobility into the blazing spotlight of European politics. As the Pope's daughter, she was no longer merely a cardinal's bastard. She had become one of the most valuable marriage prizes in Christendom. Alexander was nothing if not strategic in his use of family connections. Unlike many of his predecessors who had tried to maintain at least the appearance of spiritual detachment from worldly affairs, the Borgia Pope openly embraced nepotism as a tool of papal policy. He saw no contradiction between spiritual authority and dynastic ambition. Indeed, he viewed his children as instruments through which the Church could extend its temporal power. Lucrezia's first marriage was arranged when she was just 13 to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. The union was purely political, designed to strengthen papal ties with the powerful Sforza family of Milan. The wedding in 1493 was a magnificent affair, held in the Vatican itself, with cardinals and ambassadors from across Europe bearing witness to this alliance between spiritual and secular power. But this was Renaissance Italy, where political alliances shifted like sand dunes in the wind. Within 3 years, the strategic value of the Sforza connection had evaporated. Alexander VI needed different allies for his evolving plans, and Lucrezia's marriage had become an inconvenience. The solution was characteristically ruthless. The marriage was annulled on grounds of non-consummation, despite Lucrezia having lived with her husband for years. The annulment process revealed the first glimpses of Lucrezia's political acumen. Rather than being a passive victim of her family's machinations, she actively participated in the strategy. Contemporary documents show her corresponding directly with papal agents, discussing the terms of the annulment and even the financial arrangements for her ex-husband's cooperation. This was no mere teenage pawn. This was a young woman learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Renaissance diplomacy. Giovanni Sforza's response to the annulment would haunt Lucrezia for the rest of her life. Humiliated and embittered, he began spreading rumours that would become central to the Borgia legend. He claimed that the real reason for the annulment was Lucrezia's incestuous relationship with her father and brothers. These accusations, almost certainly false and motivated by revenge, would be repeated by enemies of the Borgias for centuries to come. Lucrezia's second marriage followed quickly. In 1498 she was wed to Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This union represented Alexander VI's attempt to balance competing French and Spanish claims in southern Italy. Alfonso was young, handsome, and reportedly genuinely in love with his bride, a rarity in Renaissance political marriages. For a brief period, it seemed that Lucrezia might find personal happiness alongside political utility. She and Alfonso lived together in Rome, and she gave birth to a son, Rodrigo, in 1499. Contemporary accounts describe her as a devoted wife and mother, actively involved in charitable works and the patronage of artists and scholars. The poison-wielding seductress of popular imagination seemed far removed from this young woman who spent her days in prayer, study, and domestic concerns. But happiness was a luxury the Borgias could rarely afford for long. As papal policy shifted once again, Alfonso of Aragon found himself on the wrong side of his father-in-law's new alliances. In 1500 he was murdered, stabbed to death in the papal palace itself. The assassins were never identified, but suspicion immediately fell on Lucrezia's brother Cesare, who had become his father's primary enforcer, and was known to have opposed the Aragonese marriage. The murder of her second husband marked a turning point in Lucrezia's life. Whether she was complicit in the assassination, ignorant of the plot, or powerless to prevent it remains one of history's great mysteries. What is certain is that she emerged from the tragedy with a harder edge, more willing to use the fear and reputation of her family name as weapons in their own right. At 20 years old, twice widowed and the mother of a young child, Lucrezia Borgia had already lived through more political intrigue and personal tragedy than most people experience in a lifetime. But her greatest challenge, and her ultimate transformation, still lay ahead. In 1501, 21-year-old Lucrezia Borgia found herself being prepared for her most important role yet, Duchess of Ferrara. Her third marriage to Alfonso d'Este, heir to one of Italy's most prestigious ducal houses, would prove to be more than just another political alliance. It would be her chance to step out from the shadows of her family's notorious reputation and forge her own legacy. The negotiations for this marriage were the most complex of Lucrezia's life. The Este family of Ferrara was ancient, proud, and initially deeply reluctant to ally themselves with the Borgias. Duke Ercole d'Este had built Ferrara into one of the Renaissance's greatest cultural centres, attracting artists like Giovanni Bellini and poets like Ludovico Ariosto. The idea of welcoming the Pope's daughter, with all the scandal and danger that name implied, was hardly appealing. But Alexander was nothing if not persuasive when he wanted something. The negotiations dragged on for months, with the Pope offering increasingly generous terms. A massive dowry of 100,000 ducats was promised, along with territorial concessions and favourable trade agreements. More importantly, the Pope offered something even more valuable. In the end, practical politics overcame aristocratic pride. The journey from Rome to Ferrara in early 1502 was designed as a spectacular demonstration of papal power and Borgia wealth. Lucrezia travelled with an entourage of over 1,000 people, including cardinals, nobles, artists, and scholars. The procession moved slowly through the Italian countryside, stopping at major cities where she was received with elaborate ceremonies. This was more than a bride travelling to her wedding. It was a diplomatic mission designed to showcase the reach and magnificence of papal authority. But the most remarkable aspect of this journey was how Lucrezia conducted herself. Gone was the passive young woman who had been shuffled between political marriages. Instead, observers noted her confidence, her intelligent conversation with local dignitaries, and her careful attention to the political nuances of each encounter. She was no longer merely a Borgia pawn, she was becoming a political player in her own right. The wedding ceremony in Ferrara was magnificent even by Renaissance standards. The celebrations lasted for days, featuring elaborate pageants, theatrical performances, and displays of courtly splendour that were talked about across Europe. But beneath the festivities lay a crucial question. Could the daughter of the notorious Borgia Pope truly transform herself into a respected Italian duchess? The answer would come gradually. Over the years that followed, unlike her previous marriages, Lucrezia's union with Alfonso d'Este proved to be both politically durable and personally fulfilling. She threw herself into the role of duchess with remarkable energy, becoming actively involved in the governance of Ferrara's territories and the patronage of its remarkable cultural life. Under Lucrezia's influence, the court at Ferrara became one of the most sophisticated in Italy. She gathered around her some of the greatest artists and writers of the age, including the poet Pietro Bembo, with whom she may have had a romantic relationship that was conducted through some of the most beautiful love letters in Renaissance literature. Her court became a centre for the emerging style of courtly refinement that would later be codified in Castiglione's The Book of the Courtier. But Lucrezia's transformation went beyond cultural patronage. She proved herself a capable administrator, taking an active role in Ferrara's complex diplomatic relationships with Venice, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. When Alfonso was away on military campaigns, she often served as regent, making decisions about taxation, trade policy, and territorial disputes. Contemporary observers, initially sceptical of the Pope's daughter, gradually came to respect her political acumen and administrative skill. The birth of her children, Ercole in 1508, Ippolito in 1509, Alessandro in 1514, and Leonora in 1515 seemed to complete her transformation from Borgia scandal to Este matriarch. She was no longer defined primarily by her father's ambitions or her brother's crimes, but by her own achievements as a ruler, patron, and mother. Yet even as she built this new life, the shadows of her past never entirely disappeared. The death of her father in 1503 and the rapid decline of Cesare's power had freed her from direct Borgia influence, but the legends and rumours continued to swirl around her name. As Duchess of Ferrara, Lucrezia Borgia discovered something that had been denied to her throughout her youth, the opportunity to wield power in her own right, rather than as an instrument of others' ambitions. The years from 1505 to 1515 would reveal the true measure of her political abilities and transform her from a notorious papal daughter into one of Renaissance Italy's most effective female rulers. The political landscape that Lucrezia navigated as Duchess was breathtakingly complex. Ferrara was strategically located in the Po Valley, surrounded by larger and more powerful neighbours who constantly threatened its independence. To the south lay the Papal States, still technically under Borgia influence in the early years of her marriage. To the north and east, the Republic of Venice harboured territorial ambitions. To the west, French armies periodically swept through Lombardy, while imperial forces from the north posed an equally serious threat. In this environment, survival depended on diplomatic agility, military preparedness, and the ability to read the shifting currents of European politics. Lucrezia proved remarkably adept at all three. Her correspondence, preserved in the Este family archives, reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations and a talent for the subtle art of Renaissance diplomacy. One of her first major tests came in 1510, when Pope Julius II, Alexander's successor and no friend to the Borgias, launched a campaign to drive French forces out of Italy. The Pope demanded that Ferrara join his Holy League, but Alfonso d'Este had compelling reasons to remain allied with France. Caught between papal pressure and French protection, the Este duchy faced potential destruction from either direction. Lucrezia's solution was characteristically subtle. While Alfonso conducted military operations alongside the French, she maintained careful back-channel communications with papal representatives. Her letters from this period, written in cipher and passed through trusted intermediaries, show her working to prevent the complete rupture between Ferrara and the Church that could have led to the duchy's excommunication and political isolation. The strategy required her to perform a delicate balancing act. To papal agents she presented herself as a dutiful daughter of the Church, constrained by her husband's political necessities, but secretly working for reconciliation. To French representatives she emphasized Ferrara's loyalty, while carefully avoiding commitments that might compromise future flexibility. Whose correspondence reveals not just political skill, but genuine intellectual sophistication in her analysis of competing interests and possible outcomes. When Alfonso was captured by papal forces in 1512, Lucrezia's political education accelerated dramatically. Suddenly thrust into the role of sole ruler, she had to manage not just Ferrara's external relations, but its internal governance as well. The duchy's finances were strained by years of warfare, its territories were partially occupied by enemies, and its legitimacy was questioned by hostile neighbours. Her response demonstrated capabilities that few had suspected. Working with experienced administrators, like the humanist scholar Ercole Strozzi, she implemented financial reforms that stabilized the duchy's economy. She negotiated prisoner exchanges that secured the release of captured Ferrarese soldiers. Most impressively, she managed to maintain Ferrara's territorial integrity while Alfonso was imprisoned, using a combination of diplomatic manoeuvring and strategic concessions to prevent the duchy's dismemberment. The cultural dimension of her rule was equally important. Renaissance Italy was a world where political legitimacy often depended as much on artistic patronage and intellectual prestige as on military power. Lucrezia understood this instinctively, using Ferrara's cultural attractions to build soft power that complemented the duchy's limited military resources. Under her patronage, Ferrara became a centre for some of the most innovative artistic and literary developments of the High Renaissance. The poet Ludovico Ariosto found support for his epic Orlando Furioso, which would become one of the defining works of Italian literature. Painters like Dossodossi created works that established Ferrara's reputation as a centre of artistic innovation. Musicians and composers gathered at her court, developing new forms of secular music that would influence European culture for generations. But perhaps her most significant achievement was the transformation of her own reputation. By 1515, foreign ambassadors were reporting to their home governments not about the notorious Borgia daughter, but about the capable and sophisticated Duchess of Ferrara. The poison-wielding seductress of popular imagination had been replaced by a respected political figure whose opinions carried weight in the councils of European powers. On June 24, 1519, Lucrezia Borgia died in childbirth at the age of 39, bringing to an end one of the most controversial lives of the Renaissance. But even as her body was laid to rest in the convent of Corpus Domini in Ferrara, the myths and legends that would define her historical reputation were already taking shape. The question that has fascinated historians for 5 centuries remains: who was the real Lucrezia Borgia? The popular image of Lucrezia as a master poisoner, sexual manipulator, and willing participant in her family's crimes began forming almost immediately after her death. This version of her story, propagated by enemies of the Borgias and later embraced by Romantic-era writers and artists, painted her as the embodiment of Renaissance corruption. Beautiful, intelligent, and utterly amoral. The poisoning allegations in particular have proven remarkably persistent. Stories circulated of a hollow ring she supposedly wore, filled with a clear liquid that could be discreetly added to an enemy's wine. Tales were told of dinner parties where guests who crossed the Borgias mysteriously sickened and died. These stories were repeated so often that they acquired the patina of historical fact, despite the complete absence of credible evidence to support them. Modern historical scholarship has systematically dismantled most of these allegations. Detailed examination of contemporary records, including diplomatic correspondence, financial documents, and private letters, reveals a picture very different from the legendary poisoner. The historical Lucrezia emerges as a woman who was often a victim of circumstances beyond her control, who adapted to survive in an extraordinarily dangerous environment, and who ultimately transcended her family's notoriety to become a capable ruler in her own right. Consider the evidence regarding the most serious allegations against her. The charge of incest with her father and brothers appears to have originated with Giovanni Sforza's bitter accusations following their annulment. No contemporary source, independent of Sforza or other Borgia enemies, supports these claims. Indeed, the timing and political context of the accusations suggest they were motivated by revenge rather than truth. The poisoning allegations are equally problematic. While the Borgias certainly had enemies who died under suspicious circumstances, there is no credible evidence linking Lucrezia to any of these deaths. Most occurred when she was either too young to be involved or physically distant from the events. The persistence of these stories seems to reflect both the general reputation of her family and the tendency of later writers to conflate different members of the Borgia clan. What emerges instead from careful historical analysis is a portrait of remarkable resilience and adaptation. Lucrezia was thrust into political prominence as a child, used as a diplomatic tool in 3 different marriages, widowed twice under traumatic circumstances, and yet managed to forge a successful independent life as Duchess of Ferrara. Her transformation from papal pawn to respected ruler represents one of the most dramatic personal reinventions in Renaissance history. The correspondence preserved in various European archives reveals a woman of considerable intelligence and political sophistication. Her letters to poets like Pietro Bembo show genuine literary sensibility. Her diplomatic communications demonstrate strategic thinking and psychological insight. Her administrative records from Ferrara reveal competent governance and genuine concern for her subjects' welfare. Perhaps most tellingly, the reports of contemporary ambassadors and visitors to Ferrara consistently describe a woman very different from the legendary seductress. Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua and one of the most formidable women of her era, maintained a decades-long correspondence with Lucrezia that reveals mutual respect and genuine friendship. Foreign diplomats, initially skeptical of the Pope's daughter, came to regard her as a valuable political contact and reliable negotiating partner. The persistence of the negative legends may reflect broader cultural anxieties about female power in the Renaissance period. Lucrezia lived in an era when women who wielded political influence were often viewed with suspicion and their achievements attributed to sexual manipulation rather than genuine ability. The salacious stories about her may have been more palatable to later generations than acknowledging that a woman could exercise real political power through intelligence and skill rather than seduction. The real Lucrezia Borgia was neither the master criminal of popular imagination nor a complete innocent. She was a survivor who learned to navigate one of history's most treacherous political environments, who transformed herself from a victim of circumstances into an agent of her own destiny, and who ultimately achieved a form of redemption that seemed impossible given the notoriety of her origins. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Lucrezia Borgia was not what she allegedly did, but what she actually accomplished, the complete transformation of her identity and reputation through her own efforts, against odds that would have defeated a lesser person.
Thank you for joining us on this enchanting journey through medieval history. While our weekly episodes will continue to captivate your imagination, there's an exclusive treasure trove for subscribers, a secret vault of bonus episodes filled with extra tales and deep dives into the subjects we cover. Your curiosity fuels our mission, and we're truly thankful for your support. Until we meet again among stone walls and towering turrets, keep that torch of curiosity burning bright. Thank you for listening.